I think a lot of companies, a lot of organizations tend to confuse resilience with endurance. And there is a difference between the two. Endurance is all about pushing through, okay? Resilience understands that sometimes, yes, you do need to push through. Say, for example, you've got a release date of, I don't know, a new software, a new product or whatever. There's a need maybe to work longer hours to try and make sure everything is ready to go to market. But the difference comes afterwards. Well, so there's this thing about performance versus well-being. So that's very hot within HR circles right now. And I do think that there's not always a clear understanding of what we mean by well-being, because well-being isn't yoga in the workplace.
Natale Mastoroudes is a senior HR leader and former chief people officer with nearly 20 years of experience across tech, fintech, and international businesses. She has led people functions across multiple countries, helping organizations scale, navigate complexity, and turn people strategy into business success without breaking the humans in the process. Natale, welcome to the Future Makers podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course. I want to start with kind of laying the foundations. And to do that, I want to ask you, what does HR mean to you?
Okay. So HR is one of those functions where everybody has an opinion on it. And let's face it, a lot of those opinions are usually like the lowest denominator. So, they're shaped from past experience, and people tend to remember negative experiences. So I don't know. I think it's a function that's taken a lot of hits throughout the years. But for me, HR basically sits in the crossroads of, I would say, business, legal, finance, and psychology. And there's real tension within that. So you've got business, which of course wants results, right? You've got legal, which wants compliance, finance, which wants efficiency. And of course, people are very complicated and they want a lot of different things. I would say, like, generally speaking, most people are looking for meaning, growth, recognition is another one, fairness, right? So you're basically stuck there in the middle, dealing with a lot of different stakeholders, tension. And that's what makes it interesting, quite frankly. But if I had to be very brief, and that's going to be an issue with me today, if I had to be very brief, I would say that HR is basically converting talent into business results and making sure that the right people are in the right place at the right time, creating conditions for them to perform well collectively. Because performance is and should be collective. It's not an individual endeavor, not really.
And I kind of want to pause here and kind of dissect that.
Yeah.
Do the conditions have to be there already in place? Or are the people, the right people, the ones that create the condition? Is this an chicken and egg kind of situation?
Yeah. So getting the right people in place obviously colors and shapes the whole, right? The culture, if you want to be very, HR technical. Yeah. So the people culture of an organization is shaped by the people themselves. Where I find it super interesting is that HR can influence that in a number of ways. So first of all, bringing in the right people, talent acquisition, growing them, talent management, that's really key in shaping collective performance. But within that, there's also other things that you can do. So you can create room for psychological safety, for example, making sure that people feel comfortable to speak up and have an opinion. Advocating for transparency is another one. Bias, that's a very, very human quality. We all have it. So there's a lot of areas that HR touches, and it touches sometimes subtly. So, a good HR professional, you don't always know what their contribution is. It's why, by the way, sometimes people look at us as the people who organize the parties or do more admin work, But there's a lot more to it than that.
Do you believe that every company needs a HR department, or at least an individual to take care of all the HR functions? And I'm talking about large corporations, but also like SMEs or just like startups.
Yeah. Okay, it's not as straightforward as that. Okay. Large organizations will have greater needs. So I definitely think that if you have an organization of more than 50 people, you should start thinking about HR. In an ideal scenario, if you are an entrepreneur who's setting up a new startup, you should be thinking about bringing in HR at the very beginning, because you have a very exciting opportunity where, it's tabula rasa, so you can build it from scratch the right way. And you should be thinking like that, especially if the plan is for that company to grow, right? If you're just opening up a shop with maybe 2 shop assistants, maybe not. But HR as a concept, as a function, should always be part of any organization, any business. And I say business, but really, you look at non-for-profits, for example, or I don't know, sports teams. They still have HR concepts that come in extremely handy. And if you don't pay attention to them, it can create a lot of other problems. So it's about early conversations, early adoptions. And this is the tricky part. I think HR is one of those things where everyone thinks they can do it. So what you often see is someone who, hey, this person is good with people. We're just going to dump HR on them. And it's not exactly like that. Or rather, it's a very dangerous thing to do. Because, the more people know about a subject, the more they realize they don't know about it, or it's constantly moving, or it depends based on the situation. And somebody who thinks that HR is, perfectly defined or can sit in a box or can just be handed to someone is probably not thinking about it the right way.
I want to now talk about you.
Okay.
What actually drew you to a HR career? Talking about your early life or later on, what was it that made you excited to enter this career path?
Okay. So look, like many people, when you're first starting out, you've no idea what you want to be when you grow up. I mean, yes, children get asked this all the time. But when you're following, for example, a traditional, how do I say it? Traditional trajectory, right? You're going to finish school and then maybe get some academic education in a university. And it was the same for me. So you often get taught that you should have a broad subject that will allow you to keep your doors open. By the way, I'm not massively in favor of that. I think, narrow is better. But that's really what I did. I took a very broad perspective because I was also advised by the people around me to do that. And instead of just doing business or management like a lot of people did, I was really good with maths. So I ended up in a bachelor's program for operational research, which is a very unusual beginning for an HR professional because it's all quantitative mathematics and statistics and game theory and not very traditional HR. But operational research talks a lot about decision theory and how people decide and make decisions. And within that, there were some electives. So I kind of figured out maybe this is way more mathematical than I wanted to be. I could still do it, but it didn't draw me in. And then I took organizational behavior as an elective at uni. And that was kind of it for me. It was like an aha moment where I completely fell in love with it. And then I had to get special exceptions to take more electives within my course. So I still finished my degree and I have my Bachelor of Science in Operational Research. But I knew by the time I graduated that what I really wanted to do was HR. And there was a debate, do I go and get a master's in HR? But I also wanted to be in London because London's cool. And so I ended up joining interviewing with a bunch of companies for entry-level roles. And one of them was Hayes. So Hayes was the fourth largest HR consulting company at the time. The third largest now. I try not to take it too personally. But it was a really great beginning for someone who didn't really know what HR was. And they paid for my professional qualification, something called an MREC. So MREC stands for Member of the Recruitment and Employment Confederation of the UK. It's like an ACCA.
Continue.
Yeah, so I was very lucky that Hayes sponsored my MREC, which is a professional qualification, very UK-based professional qualification, because it stands for Member of the Recruitment and Employment Confederation of the UK. And that was basically it. I was hooked. I started my career in consulting, which is a very different place than most HR professionals started. Did that for about 5 years, relocated to Cyprus, did it again for PwC advisory. So again, HR consulting. Before I moved in-house for the first time with Amdocs. And I have to say, I think for an HR professional, there's validity on both sides. So there's, in-house, you get to see long-term, a lot of the plans pan out. And that's very cool because you invest in it and then you get to see it mature. With HR consulting, however, you also become very good at understanding where you land very quickly. So you analyze the situation so that you can actually bring to successful end whatever project it is that you're in, that you're working on. So I don't know. I feel it's really interesting, but most HR professionals tend to do it the other way around. They go in-house and then they end up in consulting. But yeah, that was me. I was hooked for life, and I really genuinely love what I do.
So you moved from like a UK firm into like more of a Cypriot ecosystem. Did you see a stark difference between the two cultures?
Massive.
Really?
Well, the cultures, yes, the kind of businesses as well. And I think it was also where I ended up when I first moved to Cyprus. So, and also where I was in London. I went from working for very large international blue chips and financial services, mostly investment banks. So at the time, it was Barclays Capital, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Bank of America. I was part of the merger of Abbey National and Santander. So Abbey Santander, that's part of my claim to fame. I saw the credit crunch when Lehman Brothers went down. It was a very tumultuous time and a lot of money and very, very hard and fast-paced. And then you come to Cyprus, and being a smaller society, it's a lot more conservative. And I had some adjusting to do. I also joined PwC, so I got to see a little bit of the Cyprus market. And these were very different companies. I remember working on a project where we were putting an employee handbook together and a performance evaluation system for a construction company. And there was us PwC ladies in high heels and a suit speaking to construction workers who maybe didn't speak English, didn't speak Greek, didn't understand the performance evaluation system, wasn't necessarily relevant to them either. So that was a big eye-opener. But also there is a difference in culture as well. I was based in London, so everything is more, quiet. And I was very loud for London. And also, you follow the hierarchy and you follow the structure and you follow the process. And then you come to Cyprus, and part of our Mediterranean culture is to be loud and to be relationship driven and chaotic sometimes. We still get stuff done, but it was a culture shock for sure.
I want to talk about that. Something I read in your bio, the without breaking the humans in the process. Can you unpack that?
Yes. HR should be commercially aligned. I'm a very strong believer in that. I think and there is a danger of HR working in a silo almost, where, yes, you can come up with a whole bunch of different initiatives and different things to do, all for the good of the company and the people. But if it's not aligned to business strategy and business results, you can't really make as much of an impact. And you also can't convince people as easily that it's relevant to them and it's worth their time, right? The problem with that, and by the way, I've seen myself become more and more commercially aligned throughout the years, and the more senior that I get. But
can you just define what commercially aligned means?
Right. So I think it has to do with being aware of where the business wants to be. And that includes financial targets or, commercial targets, which markets they want to operate in, what's the end goal, what is it that they want to be known for in their market. So all of these are things that you do as an HR department need to be aware of and align with, because then you can identify where are the risks, the people risks, right? Where do we need to improve on? Where are there gaps maybe between our workforce and the business reality, or rather the business trajectory? So if you can, and this is where I think HR is heading, by the way, it's more about being workplace architects. So just like you have in the IT industry, a software architect, I do think that HR should operate as a workplace architect, where you can say, okay, what is it that we need here? And how do we get it? And how do we get there? And what does success look like? So what kind of roles do we need? How many of them? What skills do we need? What cost is all of this going to have? So you need to be able to speak, especially at senior level, that kind of language, the language used by CEOs and CFOs and CCOs, so chief commercial officers. I've worked with those roles and those people in the past. And in order to be taken seriously, first of all, but also to be seen as a true business partner, HR should be commercially aligned, should be able to speak the same language, should be able to have a big zoomed out view of what it is that they're doing instead of looking at each initiative individually. So that's what I would call commercially aligned. But I also see the danger of being too commercially aligned sometimes. And I've seen the impact that can have. So I've spoken a few times in the past, actually, about the need to take into consideration not breaking humans. I mean to say, making it sustainable. So when you put together commercial targets and you take into consideration workforce or people strategy, right? You need to also make space for sustainable workforce. I think a lot of companies, a lot of organizations tend to confuse resilience with endurance. And there's a difference between the two. Endurance is all about pushing through, okay? Resilience understands that sometimes, yes, you do need to push through. Say, for example, you've got a release date of, I don't know, a new software, a new product or whatever. There's a need maybe to work longer hours to try and make sure everything is ready to go to market. But the difference comes afterwards. In a resilience mind frame, you look at things like recovery time. Okay, so you've pushed through. Now is the time to take a breather, make sure that your people are okay. And also adaptability, right? So we found ourselves in a situation because of unforeseen circumstances where we had to push our people maybe harder in order to deliver. It happens. It's bound to happen. You can't account for everything. But how do we make sure that doesn't happen next time? What is it that we can do in order to maybe give more resources to our people, more skills, more tools, restructure things in a way that allows for that to not happen the next time? Whereas endurance has to do with, okay, we're going to push, and then something breaks. And when something breaks, it becomes expensive, it becomes time consuming, it can impact not just the people, which is a really big deal, but also the business. So not breaking humans is my way of saying there's a sustainable way to be commercially aligned with business for HR.
And so that is kind of your ethos as you kind of approach departments, companies. What are the trends that you are seeing across HR and across companies that might be in contrast or maybe working or maybe actually in parallel to this ethos?
Yeah, it's a tough one because every organization's different. But I do feel that each organization is also shaped by its leadership to the greatest extent. So one of the trends that I find is that everyone's talking about culture, right? And it's become a hot topic, and everyone thinks that they have the best culture, they have the best way of doing it. I think there's often a misalignment between what people say and so the values, the writing on the wall, the branding, and what the lived experience of the people who work there actually is. I mean, if there isn't a gap, brilliant. That's the holy grail, because you're essentially true to what it is, the culture that you want to implement. But culture is a lot more than the writing on the wall. Culture is not just do as I say and not as I do, but actually seeing your leaders do and live up to what it is that they say. It's also not just about what gets done, but also what gets tolerated. So if you have someone who is a big producer, I don't know, high performer, let's call it that, brings in the money, okay? It's very often the case that they get special treatment. Or maybe somebody is just loud, and therefore they get special treatment. That sends a message to the rest of the employees, and it shapes your culture. So I think that's a trend that we're seeing, that there's a mismatch. Culture in general is a trend, but there's a mismatch within that. There are a few others as well. So there's this thing about performance versus well-being. So that's very hot within HR circles right now. And I do think that there's not always a clear understanding of what we mean by well-being, because well-being isn't yoga in the workplace. Well-being is what we spoke about earlier, resilience, which is nurtured by making sure that your people get that time of recovery, or they get the additional resources, or that you very thoughtfully design the next part. So I think that's something that gets talked about a lot. And the third thing that I just wanted to mention, there's a ton, but the third thing that I wanted to mention is AI, because it's everywhere. But what's really interesting is that everybody's talking about it. I'm not sure to which extent, and there's a varying extent of adoption. Not sure to which extent it has been adopted to companies. And it's one thing to say, yeah, I've used ChatGPT to do X, Y, Z. But most people don't really know how to use AI properly. And in addition to that, you've also got agentic AI now. And you're seeing it in a lot of organizations where agentic AI replaces what would typically be referred to as low-skilled jobs. Customer support is a big one. So this is something I saw in my previous employer. We adopted an agentic AI, and we thought it would take on about 2/3 of customer contact. And then within a few months, it moved to 86% of customer contact. And that's when we thought natural attrition in customer support would make up for it. But it wasn't enough. So we did have to restructure, and that did come with a number of redundancies. And we're seeing that a lot. But that's agentic AI. It's just one thing, and people are still more talking about it than doing it. I think the real trick is using AI to augment what it is that we do. So in HR, for example, that's the part that I was referring to as workplace architects. we're doing a lot of stuff that maybe we shouldn't do, that maybe AI can take on. And that doesn't just include the admin parts, it also includes analysis. So if you've got an HR partner who, yes, will still need to spend time understanding the situation, speaking to people, I don't think that will ever be replaced by AI. It's impossible to. But it's about using the analysis and the tools that AI now has at our fingertips in order to ensure that we have a much better and greater understanding of what's going on. So AI data analysis can identify, for example, retention risks, or reputational risks, or managerial risks, right? And get there before we do, so that it can help us have those early conversations. Restructuring is another one. I've played around with AI in terms of organizational development within an organization. So when you ask it to brainstorm with you, I think that's a really powerful tool. So AI is a trend, but so far I've mostly seen talk around it. Agentic AI initial implementation, which has far-reaching results, and I haven't seen enough to really understand how AI can augment our work. I don't just mean HR, by the way, but HR is obviously where I'm coming from.
Yeah. What aspects of HR do you think should not be taken over by technology, AIs in this case?
So it's funny you should ask that, because I wrote a piece recently, it hasn't come out yet, on Top HR Voices Cyprus. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention that. But I ran a thought experiment for myself, because I really wanted to understand how we talk about AI having an impact in the workplace and in the workforce. And we know that will be the case. But I wanted to understand, what would an organizational chart of an HR department look like in 5 years' time? And I do think it's 5 years, it's not 10, when AI is very much more adopted than it is today. And I played around with it, and I ended up writing an article based on that. And I talked about how, yes, of course, you've got the admin side of HR, and that's a no-brainer, we're already seeing it. That will be replaced by AI. Great. So what does that look like for HR operations? I kind of see them as more product owners, but for HR. So they'll own the workflows of the policies and the processes. Instead of actually doing the work, they'll design the work. So I think that's where HR ops is heading. And then you've got HR partners. So that's where I see them as being architects and using a lot of what AI can give us to have those HR conversations. I think they should also be the people who ask, just because we can do something, should we do it? So that's HR partners. I think they'll exist, but their role will change. When it comes to talent acquisition, we're already seeing adoption of AI, but we're seeing all the term I use in mind is me swearing, so I'm gonna watch my language here. The messes that HR that talent acquisition or ATS AIs are putting us in, because they're biased, right? It comes with a bias that's very, very human, because it learned it from us, or because it's so structured, it's narrow. I think where talent acquisition can really add value to a business is hiring for potential. And that's hard to see from a CV. Yes, AI is becoming smarter, but I don't think it will ever be replaced. Again, I see the aspect of the human element, shall we say, being interjected into a process that's largely driven by AI. But we should still be in charge of making the decisions and kind of safeguarding AI, making sure that we don't lose real talent. Same goes for L&D, by the way. I think it's great tools that will allow us to do amazing things like training on demand. But if you ask people, they would still much rather learn from real humans. They love the flexibility of online courses, but but the human connection is always better. And I think it will allow us to have more custom training for people. It shouldn't be generic. I mean, yes, a lot of AI will take on generic training, but it's the custom aspect. Also, I don't know if you've ever watched Black Mirror. There's a few episodes where you basically get to pick your own ending. It's a little bit like that. You can build different modules and different trainings and programs, but there should be someone there who basically decides what's appropriate and what isn't for a specific case. And then you've got, people analytics, which I think is going to be so much more than what it is now. Now you've got, decks and databases and you've got people who are sitting there doing the maths. I can't wait for a time when AI is doing a lot of that analysis for us, but it should still have a human being next to it, explaining what we need, how we need it, and basically guiding the analysis to make sure that what we have is relevant, is usable, is accurate as well. Because your analysis is only as good as your data. And then I also see new positions being created within HR. In my thought experiment, in my article, I called it risk and ethics. And I think that's going to be more and more important going forward because we don't want a Skynet, do we?
No.
We don't want our AI overlords taking over. But no, it's a lot more than that. I think you need human judgment, input. Also, we need to be able to look at the tools critically, right? And look at things like biases. Make sure that it's done in the right way. So, I think there is a lot of very exciting development coming up within HR, but I don't see HR being blindly replaced by AI. And if it is, I think there will be some organizations who will try to do that and it won't end well.
I want to finish with one last question.
Sure.
So if you were advising a CEO in Cyprus, outside of Cyprus, who wants a stronger people culture this year, what are the first moves you would tell them to make?
Okay. So I'm a big believer in clarity. I think that's missing from a lot of organizations, and that should be what any self-respecting CEO invests in. There is room for more. I think you have to identify your leadership team. That's very, very important. And making sure that leadership team is aligned, because we've often seen in organizations where that doesn't happen, that it becomes messy and there's too much conflict and you don't get where you want to go. And then after that, I think it's important to hire managers who are capable. So aligned leadership, manager capability, and then you have to tie it all in with clarity. So you need to be very clear, what's your mission? What are you trying to achieve? Where are you going? What are your targets? And once you know what those are, make it clear for everyone in the organization, because if everyone's on the same page in different ways, bringing in different thoughts, different perspectives, you're basically navigating the boat, the bus, the organization to where you want it to go. So being clear, repeating the same message over and over again, CEO to leadership, leadership to managers, managers to employees, CEO to the whole company, HR to the whole company, is going to get you there. And it will allow you to have early conversations as well. So when you know something is up, you prep the ground, right? So that people know what they're waiting for, what they can expect and where they're going. And if they want to be a part of it, because that's really important too.
Yeah. Natalie, thank you so much for joining me today. There are so many nuggets of information there that I think everybody should be listening to this, because you're just basically just sharing like for free all your knowledge and experience, and like everybody should listen to this. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me. Honestly, I feel like you and I could talk for a long time. And if you get me started, we'll be here forever. So if you've made it this far, thank you for joining us. Yeah, good on you.
Thank you.
Thank you.